also witnessing a severe backlash against those who call for peace. Someone who has faced this backlash for decades and continues to face it is Dr. Finkelstein. We are here today to learn from his experiences and from each other, and to create connections and support one another while keeping in mind that the reason we continue to fight is for those civilians who are facing constant bombardment, death, and destruction. And we will continue to fight until Palestine is free. I would now like to introduce Dr. Norman Finkelstein. Dr. Finkelstein received his Ph.D. from Princeton University Politics Department in 1987. He's the author of many books that have been translated into 60 foreign editions, including The Holocaust Industry, Reflections on the Exploitation of Jewish Suffering, and Gaza, An Inquest into Its Martyrdom. His most recent book is I'll Burn That Bridge When I Get to It, Heretical Thoughts on Identity Politics, Cancel Culture, and Academic Freedom, which he will be talking about tonight with Dr. Christian Parenti. In the year 2020, Norman Finkelstein was ranked the 5th most influential political scientist in the world. And just before we begin, we do have to get out of here by 5:45, okay? And then we'll scan your tickets for the main event then. Thank you.
Well, thank you for having me. First of all, let's just do a mic check. In the back row, do you hear me fine? Yes. Okay. Thank you for having me. I don't have prepared remarks for this afternoon. My prepared remarks are for the evening event. However, I can just make some brief observations, and then I'll hear from you, and you can give me some sense of what's going on in your neck of the woods. I haven't been to Toronto in a very long time, and the car ride from the airport here was extremely depressing. I've never seen such disgusting architecture. I really haven't in my entire life. I did do a lot of traveling in my day. Whoever designed that, I think there should be a Nuremberg trial. The architects.
Sorry about that.
I don't live here. My condolences to you.
I don't live here either, so
Toronto, my day was just a very nice village, really, and it was a very warm place, not in climate-wise, I mean in spirit. I remember the days of Justin Thoreau. I don't quite know what happened on the way to his progeny, but he was actually a quite decent fellow, and he was widely credited with inventing the concept of multiculturalism and trying to make Canada a tolerable place for everybody. And there was actually already, I'm talking about the 1980s, there was already a large Palestinian refugee community in Toronto way back then. And they used to hang out at it was like a modest eatery. I don't know where now in Toronto, but they had their own hangout. And what I remember was, and it stayed with me because it was a symbol of Canada before the horrors of Steve Harper and now Justin Trudeau set in. Somebody, a Palestinian, said to me, it's never easy to be a refugee, but if there's anywhere in the world where I would choose to be a refugee, it would be Canada. And that was in Toronto. So it was a quite nice place. I don't quite know what happened. Must have been something in the water that turned this place into something quite diseased, I'm afraid. And the architecture is just one more manifestation of that water problem that you have over here. Well, that's just an aside. My general comment would be, there's always a tendency by the powers that be to make you feel despairing that you can have any real impact. And change is very slow and it's incremental, but but you should never be fooled. Public opinion is having a huge impact right now in the world, and it's causing people to change. I'm just going to give one illustration which was very striking to me. Yesterday evening, I have been a very harsh critic of Bernie Sanders since he came out against the ceasefire. I thought that was among the most disgusting, despicable acts of cowardice in the annals of human history. And I just was in a fury by it. One evening, I just couldn't contain myself. I called my young crew of techies, 3 young people who know about this thing called the internet or the web. I don't know quite what they are, but I called them up and I said, can you just get your equipment rolling? I want to say something to Bernie Sanders because this is just getting under my skin. And I did. I was very tough. And I knew, I don't claim to be a soothsayer, but I've been around politics for a long time. It's been my vocation in life. Everything else is incidental to trying to make the world a better place. Everything else is incidental to making the world a better place. Though I do love to read, and I do love Coney Island beach sunsets, but my first commitment is to the cause. And I said to people, Bernie is going to regret what he did. I know he's going to regret it. He's going to walk it back. I said he won't do it in a big way because that's admitting an error, and most people aren't able to concede they made an error in judgment, but he'll do it. And last night I was exercising. I usually turn on, I like this old TV show called Password. I'm sure nobody here has ever heard of it. But it's a very civilized game where people each team tries to convey a word to their partner. So you just take something like, okay, I'll give you an example. So, the word is house. So, on both sides, there are 2 competing teams, and you get a little card that says the word is house. So they try to convey it to their partner, so they'll say, Kafia, Palestine, and that's the word. Anyhow, I like it, it's civilized, no gadgets, no high tech, it's just the mind and play, which I like. I don't like all the razzle dazzle. So, I again figured, okay, what the heck, I saw Bernie was giving a speech in Congress yesterday. And how many people saw it? Raise your hand. It was interesting. At the beginning, it's about a new congressional bill, and has earmarks for Ukraine and earmarks for Israel. And at the beginning, it sounded a little bit technical, and as congressional bills are. But then he starts saying Israel has a far-right government. What it's doing is totally unacceptable. And then he started saying, not one more cent for Israel. Not one more cent for Israel. I'll tell you the truth. It didn't quite compute. What was going on here? All of a sudden he says, $10 billion were allocated to Israel. He said, not one more dollar. And I realized before my eyes what happened. It was exactly what I knew would happen. He wasn't going to come out and say, I'm for a ceasefire. It's hard for a person to admit an error. But he went further. Not one more penny. And I thought to myself, Bernie, I'll give you a pass. Better late than never. But you have the blood of 6,000 children on your hands. And he knows it. He knows it. He didn't know how to gracefully acknowledge that what he did was horrible. And I think in no small part, he did it because of those demonstrations and those young people for whom he was a prophet at a certain point. And he knew how much he had betrayed them, because they were making it very clear. There was a lot of public sentiment about how he betrayed them. And I think that's in large part because of what you folks have been doing. It's been just an exhilarating, really exalting experience to live through. And what I would like to spend the time that we have together in the late afternoon is for you to ask serious questions about what do you think is the right slogan now? How do you deal with attempts to shut you down? Which attempts do you think are legitimate and which do you think are illegitimate? And you should feel free to ask any of the questions on your mind. I don't pretend to be, there used to be a TV show called Ask Mr. Wizard, and Mr. Wizard was a scientist, and kids would raise their hands and, can you explain where rain comes from, or why the sun sets and sun rises? And Mr. Wizard would explain, I'm not Mr. Wizard, but I do have, I think, a fair share of life experience, and I'll give you my best judgment, not to be critical, but where I think people are going in the wrong direction. I think it's important because it's not about Bernie Sanders' famous campaign slogan was, it's not about me, it's about us. And in the same way, it's not about me and it's not about you, it's about the cause. So we're just going to have to struggle very hard to control, and it's tough, to control our egos, to control that desire to appear more radical and more, to pose and preen for the cameras. And just bear in mind, we're at a moment where it's in its most acute form. This isn't about something abstract, it's not about our egos. It's really got to be about people who are at that moment of truth. And we have to, as best as we can, to maintain, to preserve the moral seriousness that this moment requires. So, having said that, I would like now to hear from you.
Hello, sir. Thank you so much for being here today. My name is Sarah. I'm a U of T student, a community organizer. My question has to do with this call for a permanent ceasefire. It is so important, and it is from a place of anger and frustration, and it totally makes sense. Still, the term ceasefire suggests that there is an equal footing. The term itself is asking for two armies to stop and to cease violence. Palestine obviously doesn't have an army, and also it seems like a more liberal Zionist application of this term is becoming increasingly popular, whereby what is being asked for is a more humane, a quote-unquote more humane occupation, because seizing the fire doesn't cease genocide and violence and the occupation. And so my question to you as an organizer is, how do you think we can work toward pushing for more radical stances like land back, like the right of return, in spaces like like protests where civil disobedience is taking place? How can we push people to mobilize and engage with these more radical lines of reasoning?
Okay. I'm going to take them one at a time, the questions, simply because I am mentally so depleted, I won't remember. I know I'm not going to be able to remember more than one question. I think what you're asking is an important question, and I'm going to try to give as concise but also comprehensive an answer as I can. Number one, at a most general level, one of the most difficult things in politics, you'll be surprised to learn, I think, one of the most difficult things in politics is figuring out what's the right slogan at a particular moment. Because the right slogan, to figure out that right slogan requires an assessment of many things going on at a particular moment. You have to assess where are people at? Where are they ready to go? Because a slogan is not for you. A slogan is trying to organize a large mass of people around some common goal that seems achievable. Now, you have to judge where people's consciousness is. You have to figure out what's the balance of forces at this particular moment. Is this goal achievable or not? If it's not achievable, then what's the point of it? There's a difference between having, so to speak, a party program where you want to go as a member of some political party. But that's very different from a political slogan. A political slogan is, what are the broad mass of people, where are their heads at, as we used to say? Where are their heads at? And given the current balance of forces, what is a reasonable possibility of achieving? Because you don't want to put out a slogan that you can't achieve. You know why? Then people walk away thinking politics is pointless. We can't achieve anything. The whole point is to put forth a slogan that is achievable in a double sense. One, it can actually be realized. And two, it gives people a sense of their power, not their powerlessness, their power. If you keep putting forth slogans that you can't achieve, people walk away thinking, this is pointless. We can't win. Or as it used to be said in my day, you can't beat City Hall. You can never win. It's hopeless. So don't put forth slogans that you can't achieve. They may make you feel good, make you feel really radical and really pure, but if they don't achieve anything, then they don't improve the situation, and all they do is leave people feeling even more powerless. I was extremely encouraged by the fact that very quickly people understood the moment. They understood where people's consciousness was. They understood what felt realizable. You have to push hard, but realizable, namely the slogan of ceasefire now. That caught the imagination of the public where it was. Those images that were saturating the web and saturating television screens, people wanted to stop to it. That's why Bernie looked so terrible, because he was so completely out of step where public consciousness, you have to be a sadist at that point to oppose a ceasefire. You had to be a sadist. So he understood that, but he's a politician, he's stuck there. In any event, so I was encouraged by the fact that your generation immediately caught the slogan has to be ceasefire now. And it rapidly spread, very rapidly spread, which I thought was a very good thing. However, I have one qualification to that. in this, trying to bear in mind what the people of Gaza want. Of course, they want a ceasefire now. You'd have to be more blind than King Lear not to see that. Of course, they want a ceasefire now. However, there is a problem. There's one problem with the slogan of ceasefire now. The problem is this. I don't quite agree with your analysis, but there are elements in it with which I agree. The problem is, what does the ceasefire now mean? It means freezing the status quo ante. But the status quo ante, which is just a fancy term for what things were like before, the status quo ante was intolerable. That's why that's why October 7th happened. So if you just ask for a ceasefire now, then you're just returning to the situation that created October 7th and everything that happened it all over again. And then the claim is going to be made, you see, you can't trust Hamas because they broke the ceasefire. Well, of course they're going to eventually break the ceasefire again, because if you're freezing the situation where things were just before October 7th, of course they're going to break it. Because they don't want to accept a status quo with them living in a concentration camp. That's not going to happen. So I do believe we have to be honest and say ceasefire has to be the first step. We all agree on the ceasefire. No question about it. There isn't one person in Gaza today, not one, who wouldn't rally behind ceasefire now. Not one. So we have to be very clear about that. However, we should also be honest and say, if we don't want this horror to happen again, it's got to be more than a ceasefire. It can't be a freezing of the situation as it was on October 6th. Because it's that situation that created the horror in the first place. So there has to be ceasefire now and an end to the blockade. Now, end to the blockade doesn't mean a final settlement. The terms of the final settlement, I don't know, and I don't believe anybody knows. But what we do know is every international law authority, every UN expert, every commission that's examined the situation, they have all reached the same conclusion, that the blockade of Gaza is collective punishment and therefore constitutes a war crime. So it's very simple to demand a ceasefire now and an end to the blockade, which everybody agrees constitutes collective punishment and a war crime. So I think we have to be honest about these things. It will be more difficult, that second slogan, end the blockade, because people will say, well, doesn't that mean that Hamas is going to get weapons and blah, 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 blah? Well, no. What it means is you end any aspect of that blockade which constitutes collective punishment, which is illegal under international law and constitutes a war crime. I acknowledge it's more difficult to explain. Yes, it's, as I said, politics is about two things: where people's consciousness is at and where the balance of political forces are. What's achievable, that's what politics is. And ending the blockade is a little bit more complicated to explain to people. I recognize that. Though we have to agree also, saying ceasefire now is not so easy. It's caught on. But of course, Israel's going to claim, but ceasefire now means leaving Hamas in power. Ceasefire now means Hamas will be able to claim a victory, a military victory. So that's not such an easy slogan either. It's caught on. It's caught on for a very simple reason, to which I already alluded. It's caught on because the screens, every screen you look at is saturated with those images, and people don't want to care about Hamas, they don't want to hear about, they just say, what are you doing to these kids? What are you doing to these kids? So we have a much better chance of winning that one, I believe, than the blockade one. So I think for me, that, I'll tell you the truth, it came to me very late in life. When I was your age, I thought slogans were what I wanted to say. I didn't realize, no, slogans are not about you. Slogans are about having a good sense of where people are at. And I said for two reasons, and I know I'm repeating myself, but I do think they're important lessons. Number one, you want to improve people's lives. You want to achieve something. And number two, it's a psychological thing. That if you want to increase your numbers, you have to show people you can actually win something. And then they feel empowered, and they say, hey, look at that, look what we achieved. You feel good about yourself. You achieved something substantive in life. Most people don't want to be martyrs. They want to feel like their efforts went towards something, and then they'll come out again because we achieved something, so now we'll come out. So on those grounds, we have to try to free ourselves from the idea that slogans are about what I feel. No, slogans not what you feel. Slogans are about what's possible, what's achievable, and what's valuable in terms of trying to make the lives of people better.